It was in Brenzett, a little village on a hill in the south, not far from the coast. We'd gone there from the seaside town where we were staying to visit the church. Nearby, we found a pretty cottage with a bathroom, standing all alone about 2 miles from the village. It was a long, low building with flowers round it, all that was left of a big old house which had once stood here. We decided to rent it at once. It was awfully cheap. We spent the rest of our honeymoon buying old furniture from shops in the nearby market town, and new curtains and chair covers from one of the big shops up in London, and the place soon began to feel like home. It was easy to work there. I never got tired of painting the countryside and the wonderful sky I could see through the open window. And Laura sat at the table and wrote about all of it, and about me. We found a tall old woman from the village to cook and clean for us. She was tidy, skilled at cooking, and understood everything about gardens. She also told us the old names of the places nearby, and tales of robbers who'd once lived there, and of ghosts who sometimes met people in the neighborhood when it was late at night. She was the perfect servant for us. Laura hated cooking and cleaning, and I loved listening to old stories. So we left Mrs. Dorman to manage the cottage, and used her old tales in stories with pictures that we sent to magazines, which helped to bring in some money. We had 3 months of married happiness and never argued. Then, one October evening, I went to visit our only neighbour, Dr. Kelly, a pleasant Irishman, for a talk and a smoke of my pipe. I left Laura all smiles, writing a funny magazine story about village life. But when I came back, I found her sitting on the window seat, crying. "What's the matter?" I asked.
"Oh, Jack, it's Mrs. Dorman,"
she moaned.
"She says she has to go before the end of the month to care for her sick niece. But I don't believe her, because her niece is always ill. I think someone's turned her against us. She seemed so strange when she spoke to me."
"Don't worry, dearest," I said.
"But don't you see? If she leaves, none of the other villagers will want to come here, and I'll have to cook and wash plates, and you'll have to clean knives and forks, and we won't have time for writing or painting."
"I'll speak to Mrs. Dorman when she comes back," I said, trying to calm her down. "Perhaps she wants more money. It'll be all right. Let's walk up to the church." The church was large and lovely, and we enjoyed going there on nights when the moon was full. The path to it went through a wood, past 2 fields, and round the churchyard wall. It had been the old way they used to take coffins to the church for funerals. There were lots of dark trees in the churchyard. The church door was a heavy wooden one, and the windows were of coloured glass. Inside, there were rows of dark wooden seats, and at the eastern end, there were 2 grey marble figures of old knights in armour, one on each side, lying on their tombs. Strangely, you could always see them, even if the rest of the church was nearly in darkness. Their names were lost in the past, but the villagers said they'd been wild and terrible men, and that one night, in a great storm, lightning had struck their big old house and destroyed it. Interestingly, this was the place where now our cottage stood. For all that, their son's gold had bought them the place in the church where they were buried. Looking at their hard, proud marble faces, it was easy to believe the story was true. The church looked at its best and strangest that evening. We sat down together without speaking and stared for a time at the fine stone walls around us. We walked over to look at the sleeping knights. Then we went out and rested on the seat by the church door, looking across the fields while the sun went down. As we came away, we felt that even doing the cooking and cleaning ourselves wasn't really so bad. When we arrived home, Mrs. Dorman had come back from the village. I asked her to come into my painting room for a short talk. "Mrs. Dorman," I said when we were alone, "aren't you happy here with us?"
"Oh, no, sir. You and your dear lady have always been most kind to me."
"Aren't we paying you enough?"
"No, sir. I get quite enough."
"Then why don't you want to stay with us?"
"My niece is ill,"
she said uneasily.
"I must leave before the end of the month."
"But your niece has been ill since we arrived." A long, uncomfortable silence followed. I broke it. "Can't you stay for another week?"
"No, sir. I must go by Thursday. But perhaps I can come back to you next week."
I was now sure all she wanted was a short holiday. "But why must you leave this week?" I asked. She looked nervous and went on slowly.
"They say, sir, that this was a big house in the old days, and that many strange, dark things happened here. The owners, when young men, loved nothing better than attacking, robbing, and killing both men and women on land and sea. They were dangerous men, sir, and no one stood up against them. So, year by year, they went from bad to worse. In the end, their terrible crimes against nature and all the deaths of the poor little children from the villages nearby brought the lightning down from the sky to destroy them."
I was pleased that Laura wasn't in the room.